So Ukrainian forces are going house to house in Pokrovsk, trying to clear certain areas of the estimated 200 to 300 Russian forces that have made their way forward. Now, this may be the mission set for the special operations teams that came in a few days ago on helicopter, which we actually have more footage of today. Also, looks like they may have stolen a Russian T-80 tank, done a little joyriding there because why not? Meanwhile, Russian sources are saying that Ukraine has launched a successful counterattack on the Dobropillia salient, threatening further Russian advances in that direction. Also, we just kicked off a new fundraiser a few hours back with Zynga's Paw to pick up drone interceptors for the 429th Unmanned Systems Regiment Achilles. More on that later in today's video. Now, starting out with this new footage released by the Ukrainian GUR, they say, quote, "The Timur Special Unit of the GUR continues the operation in one of the most important areas in terms of frontline logistics in the city of Pokrovsk. Fierce battles are ongoing with Russian occupiers." After a successful airborne operation, additional forces of the special unit broke through a ground corridor and joined the GUR special forces who had taken the designated positions. Combat work continues, aimed at eliminating the enemy's attempts to expand fire influence on logistics in the GUR's area of responsibility. Combat missions in the sector are also carried out by other special units of the GUR of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. For the safety of the personnel involved, operational details are not currently disclosed. So a couple key notes there. First off, this is the first official confirmation from Ukrainian sources that the GUR did conduct that air assault operation north of Pokrovsk. We covered it in yesterday's video that I'll have linked in the description below. Essentially, as soon as that happened, Russian sources came out of the woodworks saying the helicopter was shot down and all of the troops on the ground were eliminated. Now, we do have the Russian response to this footage, but one thing I want to point out here is they say that they broke through a ground corridor and joined the other GUR special forces who had taken designated positions. So a lot of the assessment coming out of that air assault was that this 11-man force on or about was supposed to do something crazy. What it sounds like is that unit was simply reinforcing or tying in with another element that was already on the ground. So maybe the back half of a pincer or something along those lines. The Russian response here was essentially, whatever, it doesn't matter, who cares? Military informant said, quote, "The footage captured the moment of special forces flying in helicopters, their runs on the ground after landing, as well as the strikes by enemy FPV drones on buildings in the northwestern outskirts of the city, located right next to the helicopter landing site. In addition, fire support for the GUR was provided by a captured T-80 by firing from a concealed position." Capturing tanks is always crazy to me, but either way. They say the territory of an Electra engine plant and a former geological exploration department came under attack. Earlier, it was near these objects that Russian FPV drones fired upon the Ukrainian landing force. Thus, even in the enemy's propaganda videos, there is nothing to suggest that the GUR operation ended with any significant success. The battles for the industrial complex buildings in the northwestern outskirts of Pokrovsk are ongoing. So my general view of how the Russians are stating this now is they've not really said anything additional in terms of shooting down the helicopter or eliminating the entire landing force. Now that it's shifted over to, it doesn't really matter. We don't even know if that's successful. The fighting on there is ongoing anyways. Now, quick note on the fundraiser I mentioned at the beginning of the video. We just teamed up again with Zynga's Paw because those guys and gals have been awesome. Incredibly transparent, very, very timely with their deliveries. From the time that we raise the funds to the purchase, procurement, and delivery is very, very fast. And we've shown in recent videos the deliveries from a recent fundraiser to the Azov International Battalion. This one's a little bit different. We're teaming up with the 429th Separate Regiment of the Unmanned Systems Achilles, and we are helping their air defense assets. So we're helping them procure more interceptor drones to shoot down drones or intercept drones that are inbound to Ukrainian military positions or even going after Ukrainian civilians. So as a part of this fundraiser, as you might have guessed, we do have a couple interviews lined up. One already recorded with some of the operators from the 429 talking about the tactics and techniques of identifying and intercepting enemy drones. It's wild that that's a thing in the first place. And they kind of brushed it aside for what it's worth, made it seem really easy. And I'm certain that it's not. But either way, the goal for this fundraiser is $100,000. I can't wait to see how quickly we knock this one out of the park because you all are incredible. So the link to contribute, if interested and able, will be in the description below. Let's get after it. Now, continuing on with Pokrovsk, I want to pull the map up here to give you an idea of the areas we're going to be talking about. Two key areas today. Of course, Pokrovsk getting the bulk of the attention. This is the focus of Russian offensive operations really in the year 2025. So we've got Pokrovsk here, and for reference, this is Deep State map. For reference, the area of the GOR operations is up here in the northwest sector. So this is the area where the helicopter landed. Russia shared their footage of FPV strikes, and now we're seeing GOR footage come out of attacks in this area. It looks like trying to secure this western exit and approach to the city. Again, the only real infill and exfil route to Pokrovsk. As mentioned previously, that's one thing. The drone threat in the sky, of course, has been a much more significant threat to anybody trying to get into Pokrovsk for quite a while. The other area we're going to be looking at is up here a little further north, Dobropillia, where Russian sources are saying that Ukraine has kicked off a successful counterattack in recent days. Now, starting with Pokrovsk, looking at an assessment here, a couple different assessments. President Zelensky said, quote, Pokrovsk, the enemy hasn't had any success there in recent days. Between 26 and 30% of all combat on the front is taking place in Pokrovsk, and 50% of all guided bomb strikes are hitting the city. If you can imagine how difficult it is for our troops there. And then turning over to an assessment from Deep State Map, they said, quote, enemy infiltration into the city continues through the Defense Forces' defensive lines in the south and along the rail lines. Zooming in here to see the rail line sector bisecting the city. The enemy is being detected or destroyed in various parts of Pokrovsk, which increases the gray zone of their sabotage and reconnaissance activities. Actually, let me play some videos here real quick showing some of these clearance operations happening right now in Pokrovsk. This video specifically is courtesy of the Ukrainian 79th, showing what this looks like. As Russian forces move forward, try to dig in, they end up in basements or cellars and kind of hold on to that position. And you see Ukrainian forces going one to the next, trying to sweep them out. So Deep State continued by saying, in recent days, concentration has increased on the eastern outskirts of the city near the settlement of Rivd, and there is also detection on the northern outskirts where the number of Russian infantry is growing. The enemy is beginning to settle in the city, establishing positions, including observation posts, pilot positions, and so on. This is facilitated by the presence of a sufficient number of infantry, which also moves from area to area during attempts to clear them out. The last I heard was everywhere from 200 to 300 up to 600 to 700, and we have to expect that number is slowly increasing. They say senior military leadership has arrived in the Pokrovsk area and taken control of the situation. Currently, we see decisions to deploy various specialized units, this is coming from the Ukrainian side, various specialized units to clear the enemy from the city, who has amassed several hundred infantry. However, there are no decisions yet regarding blocking the enemy's infiltration into the southern part of the city. The results of such decisions will become apparent over time. Ukrainian drone operators try daily and nightly to locate and destroy the enemy, and this work is endless for now. So one of the concerns raised by Deep State Map there is, yes, we are seeing Ukrainian forces go in, like that GOR footage, the 79th footage. SBU also put out some footage, and the 25th is showing constant footage of locating, hunting down individual 1, 2, 3 Russian soldiers at a time, and there no doubt is value in that, in stopping the offensive push. But what Deep State Map is getting at is you can eliminate all the Russians you want in the city. If you don't cut off their movement into Pokrovsk, they're just going to continue. And recent estimates have been everywhere from 80 to 100,000 Russian forces focused on taking Pokrovsk. So not right on the outskirts, but in this general area. I would probably put that from Dobropillia all the way down to Pokrovsk, maybe even a bit west. That's a lot of troops at Russia's disposal to push into the city. Now, we have some feedback here from a Russian retired Colonel General, Ivashov, who's pretty pissed with how things are going, all things considered. He's looking at this saying kind of what we've been talking about in these videos of Pokrovsk falling is important, but why are we pretending like this is the end of the war or some strategic victory when it is a tactical success by just about all measures? Now, we should note that Ivashov, leading up to the war, criticized Putin, saying that there's no reason to get into this war. He views a lot of the challenges that Russia faces as being internal, like corruption, criminal activity, things like that, rather than an external force such as NATO. So he's been pushing against Putin from the beginning, so this isn't really out of sorts. But he said, quote, "The fact that we advanced somewhere near Pokrovsk is only a tactical success. We have no successes at the operational tactical level, and at the strategic level, we have suffered defeats in all directions. A strategic defeat will lead to the collapse of Russia. The fact that we are isolated and the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council are making statements supporting Ukraine is already our strategic defeat." Now, the reason I wanted to share this, again, is there's so much focus on Pokrovsk. And there's a couple other areas we're going to get into today where no doubt for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a lot of conflicting reports of Russia has taken 90% of the city, or there's a flag planting, or there's a Ukrainian operation, or there's not. And I think the general does a good job there of saying we're arguing over the tactical value of things on the battlefield that are costing a lot of lives, no doubt. But if we zoom out, we're going to do that right now, zoom out from Pokrovsk, look at how small that is in the grand scheme of things. Now, folks inevitably will argue that this is the linchpin. Once Pokrovsk falls, all of eastern Ukraine will fall. Well, for anybody who's been following this war for more than a few months, we've heard that before. A lot before. Like every time a moderately sized, Pokrovsk is the 72nd largest city in Ukraine. Every city that has fallen that is larger than that, we have heard, is the linchpin. And as soon as this goes, the entire Ukrainian lines will fall. We're 3 years in this war. That hasn't happened. It always could. Death by 1,000 cuts is a very real thing. But again, I agree with the general sentiment that this is a tactical victory. Hard to even make it operationally significant unless we go directly to the losses inflicted on both sides. And that leads us up here to the Dobropillia attack, which I think is better shown here on the deep state map than Suryak, although we are going to go to Suryak here in a minute. What you'll see here, the green and the blue, is the extent of Russian operations this summer. As they breached through this line, a lot of small Russian elements moved forward. We saw the 93rd Brigade, Azov, 79th, multiple units pushed in this direction to close it out and sweep through it. And it sounds like they just kicked off another operation to really sever the Russian lines to these elements up here north near Shakov, which, for what it's worth, Russia views this axis right here as being critical to continue advances to the north and to the west. So turning over to a couple different assessments here, we have military informant, so a Russian source, just yesterday saying, quote, "The enemy has launched a successful offensive on the Dobropillia salient. Judging from the footage from Russian FPV drone operators, Ukrainian assault troops advanced southwest of Volny and Novishkovo, cutting off the road towards Shkovo, therefore trying to split the salient into two parts." So looking at the map here, what they're talking about is Vilny here, Novishkovo here, Shkov on the right side of the screen. This is where we've seen a number of large-scale Russian assaults in the last couple weeks. Remember, it's slowed down a little bit, but do you remember when it was like every day there was new footage coming out of like a platoon to company-sized element, or even more than that? I think one time there was a battalion-sized element, like 30 armored vehicles pushing across open terrain and just getting hammered by Ukrainian drones. And then they did the next day, and the next day, and the next day. That was this area here, Shkov. So what military informant is saying is that they are pushing from the southwest of the Russian position, so pushing from here, trying to sever these approaches to the south, cutting off any of the forces to the north. He says, as recently stated, the existence of the entire Dobropillia salient now depends on control over Shkov, which will simplify supply to the sector and also allow for expansion to the front. Heavy fighting for the village has not yet resulted in its capture, so Ukraine is also rushing to cut off the salient before Russia manages to strengthen its flanks. An interesting one here is that these are relatively small elements. So we have not seen, there's been these large Russian armored assaults, but there's been no indication they've been able to reinforce up here. So these are probably relatively small Russian positions. Euromaidan gets into that a little bit when talking about what's happening here, saying, quote, "Ukrainian forces launched a major counteroffensive." I think counteroffensive is maybe not the right term here. Counterattack is probably more appropriate. Near Dobropillia, systematically eliminating Russian units and liberating villages, including Kucherov Yar and Zashkov. The operation succeeded partly because Ukrainian commanders moved slowly enough that the Russian officers kept sending false reports upwards, claiming positions remained stable. When Russian high command finally realized entire pockets were collapsing simultaneously, they ordered emergency mechanized counterattacks near Shkov. That could kind of explain the rapid assault. Now, I wouldn't read into that Russia was trying to save manpower. We haven't seen that, and we've definitely had a number of forces up here in Dobropillia that were cut off for quite a while. More that Russia is trying to maintain any sort of bridgehead that they did accomplish in the opening days of that attack. They say for 3 days, Russian armor pushed into Ukrainian minefields and drone coverage. The 1st Azov Corps alone reported 1,226 Russian casualties, 23 armored vehicles destroyed, 130 vehicles lost, and 39 artillery systems eliminated in 1 week. They say the attempted rescues failed completely. Drone footage shows Russian soldiers trapped in the anti-tank ditches, and they entered seeking cover, now easy targets from above. Ukrainian snipers positioned in recently liberated tree lines continue targeting any movement. Russia's pattern of concealing battlefield losses from senior command backfired. By the time Moscow understood the scale, Ukrainian forces had prepared defenses that turned every rescue attempt into additional catastrophic losses. That does kind of fit the footage that we've seen recently in this area. Matches pretty well, 1-to-1, with that assessment from Euromaidan. Now, I do want to shift over to another map. This is not the only area, of course, where fighting is taking place. I think this map's a little easier on the eyes, a little easier to see. President Zelensky just yesterday gave an assessment to some reporters where, walking through some of these more contested areas, we'll start down here in Pokrovsk. He said, Pokrovsk, the Russians have not been successful in recent days. There are currently 260 to 300 Russian soldiers in the city. Moving north, he referred to Dobropillia as difficult, saying our operation is ongoing. Shifting a little further east to Konstantinivka, the fighting is taking place. The situation remains unchanged for now. Moving a bit north to Kramatorsk, which is kind of this general whole sector of the front here. He says in Kramatorsk, no changes. Liman, a little bit further north as well. He says in Liman, no changes. The situation is stabilizing. And then I want to go all the way up to Kupiansk, which is an interesting one, getting a lot of attention right now, and this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on. In Kupiansk, right here, he says the dates for the clearing of Kupiansk have been set at headquarters. There are only 60 Russian forces that remain inside the city, but he did not want to make the information on the date of its clearance available to the public quite yet. And this is an interesting one. Shifting over here to Suryak map, this is one that we're going to hear a lot of mixed information from in coming days because it's already started. So to begin with, much of Kupiansk right now is, we say under Russian control, but there are Russian elements, right? So very similar to Pokrovsk, where you're talking about 1, 2, 3 Russian soldiers at a time. In fact, for a period there, they were using pipelines to even move across some of this open terrain because they had such a hard time getting any significant numbers into the city. So very similar to Pokrovsk, Ukraine now has elements pushing in from the west, trying to clear out portions of this city. There have been a lot of conflicting reports in recent days. Russian channels talking about Ukrainian forces here being surrounded and cut off, and then Ukraine responding with, you've only got 60 people in the city, we've begun our clearance operations, and we're going to push you out entirely. So I would expect a lot of media back and forth around Kupiansk in the coming days, but it's another area worth keeping an eye on. Now, again, for those interested and able, we just kicked off that fundraiser with Zynga's Paw and the Achilles guys, trying to pick them up some drone interceptors. I'll have that link in the description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.